Picture the scene. It is 2014. Kawasaki released some patent drawings about a 1000cc motorcycle with a supercharger. The motoring press go crazy, and it wasn't until 2016 that we actually got to see the infamous Kawasaki Ninja H2R, which is the 320 horsepower track-only weapon. A few years later at the EICMA show, Kawasaki released the Ninja H2, the road-based version of that motorcycle. Some complain that it was only 200 horsepower. Why was it down on power? But the bike was exceptionally special. 7 years later, I own a Kawasaki H2. Join me and I'll tell you why this bike was so special in 2016, and today in 2022, why it's even still as special as it ever was. Jopsy, roll the intro.
This is how a Kawasaki 750 Mark IV is made. Making a motorcycle takes a lot of effort and experience, and Kawasaki goes to great lengths to ensure all Kawasaki's are made as carefully and perfectly as possible.
Kawasaki has been known throughout the years as a manufacturer who pushes the boundaries. From its 750 H2 triple, which set the world alight in the early 70s.
To determine maintenance and service records.
And then the GPZ 750 Turbo in the early 80s.
Several turbocharged motorcycles have been developed to date, but none have achieved just the right blend between weight, power, and performance. Until now, that combination has remained out of the reach of engineers. Until now, that is, putting the new turbo through standing 400-meter sprints in an impressive 11.2 seconds. Later, American rider Pee Wee Gleason slashed this to 10.71 seconds for the quarter mile, making the Kawasaki 750 Turbo the world's quickest production motorcycle.
Kawasaki was always pushing the boundaries of speed and performance. Kawasaki hasn't rested on its laurels since the 80s, and continued to develop in many industries from aerospace to shipping. And then in 2014 it was time to push the boundaries once more. It was time for the age of the supercharger. And the H2R was born. The H2R was designed to be the pinnacle of sports motorcycles and produces an incredible 320 horsepower. The bike bears the name of the original 1970s H2 triple. The H2 features many cutting-edge technologies, silver metal paint produced using a chemical reaction, a 2-speed supercharger using aircraft-derived planetary gears. Even the frame building required specially developed robots to produce a very high-quality final product. Kawasaki didn't leave it there. The H2R was only the beginning, and 5 months later the road-based H2 was unveiled to the public. Eight years later, the Kawasaki Ninja H2 is still one of the most exciting and special motorcycles on the road today. Chops, over to you.
So the Kawasaki Ninja H2. Where do you even start with this motorcycle? Where do you even start talking about this bike? As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you know, these came out in 2016. The H2R came out first. You know, imagine that, the H2R coming out, 320 horsepower. Carbon fibre everything, and then they said don't worry, there's going to be a road-based version coming at the EICMA show in November, whenever it is. So when they announced and showed off the H2 version, and it only had 200 horsepower, as you can imagine, going from 320 horsepower to 200 horsepower, people were a little bit disappointed that Kawasaki hadn't done a little bit more with it, you know, and at least brought out 250 horsepower. I think Kawasaki didn't do it just from, they didn't want to be seen as being irresponsible. You know, producing a 250 horsepower road bike would, you know, it's going to raise some eyebrows, isn't it? And they didn't want to be that manufacturer to do that. The H2 was always about a showpiece of, you know, showcasing what Kawasaki heavy industries are all about, but we'll come on to more of that in a minute. But when the H2 came out, there was some disappointment. What it did do very well was it had bags of torque. So it may have been, you know, S1000RR power figures, but it had loads of torque compared to the S1000RR. Whoa. The heart of this bike is, of course, that supercharger. So how did they develop that supercharger? Well, if you weren't aware, Kawasaki Motorcycles is just one division of Kawasaki, sort of global, if you like. They're also involved in aerospace, shipping, all sorts of things. SpaceX, you know, space development as well. Kawasaki have got their fingers in a lot of pies. And basically what happened is when they decided they wanted to produce a supercharged motorcycle, because remember they had the GPZ turbo, the 750 turbo from the 80s, they were turbocharging bikes back then. They realised that supercharging was a much better way of forced induction on a motorcycle, because you didn't want that turbo lag, you wanted instant power. So what Kawasaki wanted was a centrifugal supercharger. It's like a two-stage supercharger which ramps up a gear and spins faster at higher RPMs. Now, first of all, Kawasaki Motorcycles contacted a few, you know, supercharger manufacturers and said, these are the specs we want. Can you make us this supercharger? And the answer was, it's impossible. I won't go straight on because that guy's going straight on. They said, it's impossible, it can't be done. Don't say that to Kawasaki. They went and spoke to their turbine division and said, we want to do this. They said, let's make a bike between us, the whole Kawasaki Industries, let's produce a showcase motorcycle. And that's exactly what they did. So they produced a supercharger in-house. It's centrifugal, as I say. It's got planetary gears, which is the same technology used in jet engines. And the beauty of it is they wanted a unit which actually doesn't need, they didn't want to put an intercooler on the bike because it adds a lot of unnecessary weight. So they wanted this supercharger which was fast, produced a lot of boost, but also didn't produce a lot of heat. Basically the whole bike is built around that supercharger. There's no consideration for the aesthetic look of this bike. This bike is 100% function over form, and that's why it looks like it does. And you either love it or you hate it, one of these, because they don't look beautiful, but they just look menacing because they're made to be functional. First of all, function. The H2 has a very similar engine to the H2R. As I said, the H2R is 320 horsepower. The H2 engine is identical, you know, the head's the same, the block's the same, the pistons are the same. The only difference with the H2 compared to the H2R engine is the H2R has different cams, obviously higher lift cams. It has a different ECU with obviously different maps, and it runs more boost pressure. That is really it. So you can take this engine to the same level as the H2R, but then of course you are, well, you're 320 horsepower on a road bike. I mean, it's just getting silly. When does it end? Let's talk a little bit about my H2. My H2 isn't standard, it's a 2017 bike. I bought it when it was a year old, but it only had 1 mile on the clock. It was just PDR'd and then it sat in a dealer, you know, just as a showpiece really. It hadn't been used. It did have one owner, but that was actually the dealer which had the motorcycle. So it was a brand new bike for all intents and purposes with 1 mile on it. It's now, this is now my 3rd year of ownership. When I got it, obviously it was completely original, completely standard, and in that time I've gone through it. I'd like to think improved it. I know a lot of people believe that these should be kept absolutely standard, you know, you shouldn't mess with them. Well, of course, I've done all the work myself to this bike, so all of the standard equipment, I've got it all tucked away in the loft. So if I want to return this bike to 100% stock, I can do that. So I don't see a problem with doing mods as long as you're keeping the standard equipment and can return it to standard again one day. So that was always my plan. So it was about 2 years ago, I sort of decided that the standard power figures, well, you know, it wasn't lacking power, it was an absolute weapon. But I thought, you know, Kawasaki have designed this bike and they've strangled it really. They're running this bike standard at 200 horsepower is really strangling it. And the way they have to sort of restrict it to 200 horsepower is by having the throttle bodies closing from 10,000 revs, you know, upwards. So the throttle bodies slowly close, loads of fuel's pumped in, but the air is cut off and basically the bike's starved, you know, and it only makes 200 horsepower. By just a simple de-restriction, you know, by just making those throttle, where are these guys going? By just making those throttle bodies stay open 100% when you've got the throttle at 100%, and obviously correcting the amount of fuel going in, you can make 250 horsepower out of these very easily. And that's all this bike is. I think this was 248 horsepower at the back wheel with the baffle in, because I wanted it mapped with the baffle in because it's just too crazy loud with the baffle out. So this bike is 248 horsepower at the back wheel or something like that. That's at the back wheel. So remember, you're probably losing another 15 horsepower through the transmission, so it's probably like 265 at the crank. Plenty enough for anyone, I would argue. So here it is, my 2017 Kawasaki Ninja H2. Now, as you can see, I've done a few mods to this machine from when it was brand new back in 2017, but let me talk you through some of them and some of the details of this machine, because this bike has an amazing presence on the road, but it's not until you get up close to it and you see the details that you really start to appreciate it for what it is. So first off, let me share with you some of those welds I was telling you about. Special processes were designed to get these welds looking like they do. Actually done by robots. I mean, a lot of people have said, you know, these welds must have been just cleaned up afterwards, but that is how they come. That is how these welds are finished, and then the bike is painted. So, you know, special attention to detail just to make the welds on the trellis frame look special. The chrome black paintwork, you can see it sort of picking up some reflections, well, hopefully you can on the camera, and sparkles. Got a bit of sparkle in it. It's a matte undercoat with a specially developed process which creates a silver top coat. This isn't paint, this is actually silver. This is actually real silver created in some technical chemical reaction, and Kawasaki sort of perfected it. The later bikes from 2019 had self-healing paint, so in the sun when it got warm, it would actually, any scratches would start to knit together and heal itself to a degree, obviously, but the 2017 is not self-healing. It's just sort of standard paint finish, but it's in, you know, that is the paint, it's little details like the special finish which just make this bike look so incredible in the flesh. The rear seat has like bolsters to hold you in. Now that's how fast the bike is. It's got bolsters, and these are actually adjustable. There's like 3 positions where these can sit depending how big your bottom is. With my bottom, obviously they're all the way back, it's maxed out to give me maximum room, but these actually can, if you've got a smaller ass, if you're a bit smaller, these can move forward to about here to sort of lock you in to that tank for those top speed runs. The H2R had a full titanium system, and this system on this bike is made by Van Diemen, and it's actually a copy of the H2R system. It's actually made better than the H2R system because the H2R system is prone to cracking. So Van Diemen have recreated it for us mere mortals to put on our H2s, but it's a full copy of the H2R system in polished titanium, and it just looks absolutely incredible. Absolutely finishes the bike off. So if you're looking for a system for your H2, the Van Diemen is absolutely beautiful. And I run my bike with the baffle in. It's just so crazy loud with the baffle out. In the UK, you just won't get away with running the baffle out. They're just too noisy. So I run the baffle in just for the sake of my neighbours and my ears. On the left-hand side of the bike, you've got that inlet which takes you straight into the supercharger. So as I mentioned, air throughput was key for this bike. So it's only on the left-hand side. You've got a snorkel which directs air directly into that supercharger from the big mouths at the front of the bike. Now the H2R, both of these, you could have air going in. Both of these were part of the air scoop because there was no headlight, so it just went straight across the front of the bike. On the Road Boast H2, you've got the headlight in the middle, so only the right-hand side is part of the air box. Well, not air box, but the air feed into the supercharger. Whoa. The whole bike is wind tunnel tested. So these are the H2R wings, but the whole of the front end is developed in a wind tunnel, basically for aerodynamics, to keep the bike stable at speed, and also these little scoops here to scoop as much air as possible into the airbox. But it also feeds and pushes air into the radiator, because Kawasaki didn't want to have a great big radiator on this bike, so they kept a sort of standard size radiator and cooled it efficiently with the aerodynamics. So a lot of time was spent wind tunnel testing this machine, basically creating this aero, creating the design. These little side pods on the side here. So the idea being, Kawasaki didn't want to produce a great big long motorcycle, because obviously if you want speed, you can increase the wheelbase to gain speed. They didn't want to do that. They wanted a bike which could handle as well. So they used the aerofoils on the front and the side to create downforce to keep the bike stable at speed without having to stretch it. So all those with stretched H2s, you've gone against the whole principle of what Kawasaki wanted for this motorcycle. Keep a bike which handles, but has that stability due to the aerodynamics. I've also fitted a Moto Composites carbon cowl, because normally the H2 has the silver cowl as well, but I've gone for sort of that H2R look with the aerofoils, the spoilers, and also the carbon front cowl. Ooh, sexy. The 2017 onwards bike come with an Öhlins rear TTX shock. The early ones, I think it was a sack shock. All of the H2 and H2Rs have the KYB front forks. I have indicators in the clip-ons because I don't have any mirrors on my bike, so I don't have the indicators integrated with the mirrors, so I have them in the clip-on. The dash on the 2015 to 2018, is it? Or 2019 is an LCD dash, but I think it's one of the nicest, classiest dashboards in existence, with these lights which light up as the rev counter goes round. Analog rev counters, you can't beat them. I actually much prefer that. If someone said they could fit the TFT version on this bike for nothing and just swap it, I wouldn't do it. I really prefer this analog version. So there it is, my Kawasaki Ninja H2, an incredible motorcycle. Let's jump back on.
Power, more than simply fuel and flame. It's a collection of forces working in perfect synchronization. A supercharger born of Kawasaki turbine power. Flawlessly machined metal, meticulously crafted aerospace bodywork. Together these forces unite in the spirit of our undying quest for greatness, to create something that's built beyond belief.
So let's have a little bit of a tickle. In this bike it's very important that if there's ever a bike I'm pleased I've got traction control on, it's this bike. And I've got it on level 2, it's got an IMU as well. It's one of the first bikes to have an IMU, this. And it needs one, to be honest. Oh, it's crazy. Absolutely crazy. One problem I do have with this bike is it's a little bit snatchy when it's running in full power mode. That is because when I had it mapped, we didn't have much time to perfect the sort of initial throttle response. So I'm actually taking this back and we're going to correct the initial pickup of the throttle because it's really aggressive. And if you're going around a roundabout like that, it's very easy to, you know, it's like on and off, it's very on and off, it's not very pleasant. The throttle response on this bike takes a lot of finessing, and if you're in a corner like that, it's horrible. So I'm going back to see Chris at CJS and we're going to sort that. So that'll be coming later on, actually, probably next month. We'll be taking this back just to get the mapping finished on the initial throttle opening. So yeah, look out for that video, and then this bike will be perfect. What with my clip-ons, the higher clip-ons, I've got 20mm higher clip-ons, I've got the Louis Moto seat and the new gel. It's really nice. It's much more comfortable than it was. Much more comfortable now. It's a big old bike, but Kawasaki wanted to produce a sports bike. They wanted something which would handle. They wanted something with a short wheelbase that would go around corners, and that is what they made. Yeah, it's a little bit heavy because you've got superchargers, you've got metal plenums, you know, you've got a dog ring gearbox, a heavy duty gearbox to handle all that power. There's a lot of additional weight when you put a supercharger on a bike. And I think the H2R was about 220 kilos. The H2 Ninja I'm talking about was about 245 kilos because of that extra weight, you know, the big exhaust, big steel exhaust, big stainless steel exhaust with like Euro regulations, etc. So this one, because I've now got the titanium exhaust, I've got a lightweight lithium battery, I've got the carbon fibre cowl, well that carbon fibre doesn't weigh much, but I've got titanium bolts. I'm probably about the H2R weight on this. I think I'm around about the 220 kilos, which for a sports bike is 20 kilos heavier, you know, than a lot of the modern sports bikes. But it's still, you know, 20 kilos is quite a lot, but it still handles well enough, you know. I don't really notice that extra weight. It's a little bit of extra weight. It's not masses of extra weight. It's the throttle response is more of the problem. See how it pushes on when you give it the tiniest amount of throttle. That's more of the problem. Once that's corrected, I think it'll be incredible. Really give it the guns and open it up like that. Oh, wow. That's mind-blowing. Thing about the H2, or good thing depending on your perspective, if you're an existing owner or not, is in Europe they're no longer for sale because the bike doesn't meet Euro 5 and they don't sell enough of them to warrant Kawasaki investing and making it Euro 5 compliant. So in the UK at least you can no longer buy a new H2, and looking on Auto Trader, looking on eBay, they seem to be drying up, all the second-hand ones, and the prices are starting to go skyward because you can no longer get them. I don't know if that's the same for the rest of the world. I think in the States, I think people are still getting new ones, but in Europe, they're no longer being sold because they're not Euro 5. So, as an existing owner, that is quite interesting. You know, the residual values of the H2s, they've always been held their money really well because they are so special. But now you can no longer buy them. I think the prices are going to be going in that direction, so I will certainly be holding on to this. The H2SX has a different engine. It's got a different cylinder head, different pistons, different conrods, different mapping, obviously, different supercharger as well. The H2SX isn't built the same as the H2. It doesn't, you know, it's not built on this special assembly line with the special welds done on the frames. I mean, it's still a lovely bike, the SX, but it's not as special as the Ninja. So in my 3 years of ownership, have I had any problems? The bike's only got, I think it's got about 3,700 miles on it. So it's just, I don't use it that often. It's about just under 4,000 miles on the bike. It's been running this sort of 245 horsepower for about 2 years now. I've had no issues. I've had one problem with the bike, and that was the clutch slave cylinder was jamming. I was getting some horrible graunchy feeling at the lever, and I thought there was something wrong with my clutch blades because I also fitted the Brock's uprated clutch springs, and after I did that job I got this horrible graunchy clutch, and I'm like, oh god, I've done something wrong with the clutch plates. And I'd put a clutch plate in the wrong way round. Thanks to the person who pointed that out to me. I had done that, but I corrected that and it still didn't fix it. It's still like this horrible graunchy clutch, and I go out for a ride and it would be like they couldn't even pull the clutch in the end. It was like, oh. So I did a bit of googling, as you do, and apparently it can be a common problem with the slave cylinder sort of just catching on the rod. There's like a slave cylinder which pushes a rod through to engage the clutch, and where it's on like a very tight machined slot, you know, in the actual slave cylinder it can get graunchy, it can catch. And people said just put a lot of white lithium grease in there and put it back together again. That's what I did, and it's been fine since I've done that. But apparently for some models Kawasaki did a recall of that slave cylinder, but I never got a recall about it, so I don't think mine was one of the ones which was meant to be affected. But I did have this graunchy clutch, so that's the only issue I've had. I've had no other problems whatsoever. It's been as good as gold. Touch wood.
In life, you will meet those motivated by fear rather than desire. And they'll be sure to warn you about the dangers of the unknown. They'll say, be careful. It's a wild world out there. But look in the mirror and ask yourself, what's more frightening? The wild unknown, or a life of quiet desperation? The supercharged Kawasaki Ninja H2R. Built beyond belief.